Today, we're going to talk about reflection photography, which is one of my favorite iPhone photography techniques. And in this video, you're going to see why I love it so much. And after you see how it can be applied in your iPhone photography, I think you're going to love reflections just as much as I do. So as a photographer, your goal is to show the world to people in a way in which they've never seen it before. And that's how you can create photos that are memorable and unique. And reflections are probably one of the easiest ways to do that. And the interesting thing about reflections is that you don't really normally pay that much attention to them in real life. Once you start looking around, you'll see there are reflections everywhere. You can see reflections on glass surfaces, windows, cars, any water surface, wet floors, ice, and the list goes on. And there are all these reflective surfaces in the world around you. But what tends to happen is that the human eye just ignores reflections because it's trained to look at the stuff that actually matters, which is the stuff that's not in the reflection, at least in terms of you functioning as a human being. But in photography, you get to choose what you include in the frame and what you leave out of frame. And if you find a good way to mix the reflection with what's actually there in reality, you can create really unique, really powerful photos quite easily. So in many ways, reflection photography is kind of like a trick or a shortcut, because with relatively simple techniques, you can create really powerful and really extraordinary reflection photos. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how you can do that. So the first thing we'll be working with is this water right here in the background. And you'll see that we have the beach or the sea in the background, but then closer to us, there are these tiny water puddles. And even though they don't look that spectacular in real life, we will be able to take some extraordinary reflection photos right here, right next to my feet, because of some of the techniques I'm going to share with you in this video. So one thing that's really important in reflection photography is how close you can get to the reflected surface. And if you've seen these beautiful mirror-like reflections that almost seem too good to be true, the way they're captured is always by placing the lens of the iPhone extremely close to the reflected surface. And this is actually one area where the iPhone camera is much better than a bigger DSLR, because the iPhone lens is relatively small, and it is also extremely close to the edge of the iPhone, and because of that you can put it much closer to the surface than any other camera. So when you're doing reflection photography, you want to keep in mind that the lens of the iPhone is here in this corner. So don't rotate the iPhone like this if you're doing reflection photography. Instead, you want to make sure that the lens is as close to the reflective surface as it possibly can be, and that way you'll get more interesting and stronger reflections. So in terms of holding the phone, especially when you're working over the surface of the water, you might have a question about how do you not drop the phone in the water while keeping it really close. And what I usually do is, well, first I hold my iPhone steady with both hands, and I'll often support the bottom of my arms inside the water, just like I'm doing it right now. And you can literally see that my arms are getting wet, but the iPhone is not getting wet, and it is positioned in a stable way. And then I can use my thumb to press the shutter, or what I can do instead is use the volume up buttons of the iPhone and use those for shutter release. So those are the two ways you can press the shutter while doing reflection photography. But the thing that matters here is that you get really close to the reflective surface, and a good way to do that is by supporting your hands on the surface itself, or in case of a puddle or water surfaces, just putting your arms inside water actually works really good. So right now we can see a subject approaching, and what I'm going to do is gently follow the subject and take several reflection photos. And the interesting thing here is that the subject is mirrored perfectly in the reflection, And since my iPhone is so close to the surface of water, I get a perfect mirror-like image that almost seems too good to be true. Right now, I want to take a moment to briefly discuss composing such reflection photos. So if we look at the screen of my iPhone, what we can see here is that we have an interesting subject here, and you will see that I am combining this subject and the reflection of the subject inside the same photo. And this is how it should be done. The interesting thing about reflection photography is that if you just take a photo of reflection and nothing else, more often than not, you will end up with a photo where you can't even tell that it's a reflection. So because of that, you always want to mix reflection and reality, and you want to find a compelling way to do that so that it's really beautiful and so that it is clear that we have both the reflection as well as parts of the image that are not reflected in the composition. Now, as far as compositional choices go, I can tell you that for symmetrical reflections, such as the one I'm capturing right now, one thing that works exceptionally well is placing the horizon in the center of the image, which is what I'm doing right now. And if the horizon is exactly in the center, that tends to work really, really well from a compositional standpoint, and it really helps emphasize symmetry in your reflection photos. Now, just to be honest with you, I do not fully see the screen right now, and because of that, I might end up with a slanted horizon. But the good thing is that it's relatively easy to change that in post-processing. But still, the benefits of shooting from such a low angle outweigh the fact that sometimes I might get a slanted horizon, because honestly it is kind of hard to see the screen when the iPhone is so close to the surface of water. But one of the benefits of holding the iPhone this close to water is that if there's some tiny ripples in the water, these ripples get magnified a lot, and that results in some very interesting and very strong distortions in the reflection. And you know, sometimes if you're in the sea, you will have these ripples naturally, but at other times, you can literally use your hands, which is what I'm doing right now with my fingers, to create ripples. And what happens is that these tiny little ripples that I'm creating, they create a very strong and very powerful distortion in the image. And as a result, I end up with a reflection that's kind of more mysterious, more painting-like. And this is a great way and a great technique. You can really make your reflection photos stand out more. Because a perfect mirror-like reflection is nice, but if you can distort the reflection just a tiny bit, that tends to work even better. And finally, in terms of setting focus, one thing I recommend doing is always setting focus on the real part of the image, not the reflection. So I'm going to try to do that right now, and you'll see that I've locked focus and exposure on the top part of the image. And that's because when your iPhone is this close to the reflective surface, the autofocus might sometimes fail you. It works fine most of the times, but occasionally the iPhone will set focus on the extreme foreground, and as a result, you might end up with some blurry photos. And to prevent that, I recommend that you always set and lock focus and exposure on the real-life subject, not the reflected version of the subject. Okay, so right now we're standing in the middle of the city and the rain has just ended, and this is a perfect time to take reflection photos of puddles. Now, the interesting thing about puddle photography is that if you look at a puddle like this, it really doesn't seem all that interesting. It's a tiny puddle and it's the kind of thing you'd never pay attention to in real life. But in photography, you can do some really interesting reflection photography, even with tiny puddles like this. Now the key here is that you experiment with different angles and that you go beyond the most obvious angle to find a really good shot. And that's what we're going to attempt to do with a puddle like this. Now one thing I can immediately tell you is that you don't want to just settle for the first shot that you take, because the more you experiment with different angles, different heights, and different composition, the more likely it is that you will be able to take a great puddle photo. So right now, what I'm going to do is just walk around the puddle and try to find an interesting shot from a good angle, and hopefully I'll be able to get some subjects into the frame as well. Okay, so right now I've found an interesting angle, and the reason I like this angle is that, well, there are actually a few reasons. And the first thing is that from this viewpoint, I get to actually combine the reflection with reality, and that's actually one of my top tips for reflection photography. For example, in this scene, you'll see that we have these cobblestones in the foreground, and we have the end of the puddle in the background, and this allows me to take not just the reflection, but also to combine it with elements that are not reflected. Now, the other reason why I like this scene is that there's a steady stream of people walking by, and that gives me an interesting choice of subjects. So what I have to do is essentially just wait for the right people to walk through the scene, and when the moment is right, I'm going to take a photo, and hopefully it's going to work out. So right now, I'm taking a photo using burst mode as a person passes through the scene, and this allows me to create an interesting reflection photo. So another type of reflection photography that's really easy to do in urban areas is reflections in different glass surfaces. And in big cities like this, you'll often see that buildings have some glasses, like glass walls like this, and you can use these for pretty perfect mirror-like reflections in your iPhone photos. And when you take reflection photos next to walls like this, what I like to do is get my iPhone as close to the reflective surface as possible. So I'll literally make sure that the lens of the iPhone is really, really close to the glass, and that way I can create perfect mirror-like images where everything that happens on one side of the photo gets perfectly mirrored to the other side of the photo. And when I do this, in terms of composition, I try to divide my photos right in the middle so that essentially the reflection and reality are separated straight in the middle of the photo. So what I'm going to do right now is position my iPhone next to the glass wall. I'm going to frame the shot. I'm going to set focus and exposure manually to make sure that nothing goes wrong. And then I'll wait for subjects to pass through the scene until I find the perfect moment where the reflection is really interesting and the photo just tells an interesting and compelling story. Okay, so what you can see right now is that I'm actually supporting the iPhone against the glass surface, so that helps me reduce the movement of the camera. And what I'm also going to do is set focus manually so that the image ends up being perfectly sharp. So right now I'm just going to frame the shot, and I'm going to set focus on this zone here on the right hand side, and that should leave most of the subjects who pass through the scene in focus. So all I have to do now is just hold my iPhone steady and be patient and wait for interesting subjects to pass through the scene. While most reflective surfaces are typically flat, which results in perfect mirror-like reflection photos, sometimes you can find reflective surfaces that are curved, such as the back window of a car. And when you're working with curved reflections, you can really bend reality and create some more interesting and more unique photos that you wouldn't be able to capture otherwise. Now, this does look a little bit weird, but if you work with bent reflective surfaces like this, you can create some really interesting and really abstract reflection photos with your iPhone. I hope you enjoyed the techniques I shared with you in this video. I can tell you that reflection photography is one of the most fun things you can do when taking photos with the iPhone. It's something I love doing all the time, and once you train your eyes to see the reflections in the world around you, you'll be so surprised to find out that reflections are pretty much everywhere. Just the trick is to learn how to see them and then to be able to use them to take beautiful photos. Now, one final tip I want to give you when it comes to editing reflection photos is that occasionally you can get really interesting results if you revert or invert a reflection photo. So if you have a horizontal reflection on the surface of water, for example, what you can do is simply flip the photo in post-processing, and then what you can literally trick the eyes of the viewer into thinking that the part of the image that's in the reflection actually is in real life, and vice versa. So that's a quick trick you can use for editing your reflection photos. But once again, the most important thing for you right now is to just go out there, look for some find some reflective surfaces, and go ahead and practice the things you learned in this lecture. I can tell you that reflections are so much fun, and once you learn how to take beautiful reflection photos, it will get addictive and you will not be able to stop. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you got a lot of value out of it. Now, there's so much more I'd like to tell you about iPhone photography, and while I didn't hold anything back, there's only so much I could share with you in a short video like this. And that's why I've recorded an entire video course about taking incredible photos with your iPhone. So if you'd like to find out more about my full iPhone photography course, you'll find more information right under this video. So take a look at my full iPhone photography course, and I hope to see you there.